The night I left my husband, he punched a hole through the wall beside my head. I did not scream. I did not beg. I did not even look at the blood running over his knuckles. I simply tightened my hand around the handle of my suitcase and told him the one thing he was never prepared to hear. You should have read the papers before you signed them. Grant. Then I placed my wedding ring on the marble table between us and walked out of the mansion he believed belonged to him. Behind me, Admiral Grant Mercer shouted my name with the same voice that had commanded ships, terrified young officers, and entire rooms full of powerful men. But that night, his voice had no power over me, because by then, I knew what he had done. And more importantly, I knew what I was going to do about it. My name is Evelyn Mercer. I was 40, 2 years old, married for 17 years, and for most of that time, I believed my husband was a hero. The country believed it too. Grant wore a white naval uniform, so perfectly that strangers stood straighter when he entered a room. He had medals across his chest, silver beginning at his temples, and the kind of smile reporters called reassuring. He had appeared on television after hurricanes. He had testified before Congress. He had shaken hands with presidents. At home, he called me Evie. In public, he called me his anchor. I helped build the life that made his legend possible. I hosted dinners for senators and defense executives. I remembered the names of their spouses. I chose the flowers, protected Grant from awkward questions, and smiled when photographers asked me to stand closer to him. The mansion in Alexandria, Virginia, had belonged to my grandmother. It was a white stone house overlooking the Potomac, with a curved staircase, crystal chandeliers, and black and white marble floors that always felt cold under bare feet. After my mother died, the house passed to me through a family trust. Grant moved in after our wedding. Within 5 years, everyone called it the Mercer residence. Even me. That was how completely I had disappeared inside his life. 3 weeks before I left him, I received a cream-colored envelope with no return address. It was waiting on the hall table when I came home from a charity luncheon. Inside was a photograph. Grant was standing outside a hotel in Charleston. His arm was around a brunette woman in a red coat. Her face was turned away, but his face was clear. He was smiling at her in a way I had not seen him smile at me in years. On the back, someone had written 4 words. She is not the secret. At first, I thought it was cruelty. Grant had enemies. Men who rose as quickly as he did always had enemies. I slid the photograph into my desk and told myself I would ask him about it after dinner. But that evening, when Grant came home, he kissed my cheek and told me he had spent the previous night in Norfolk. The photograph had a date printed in the corner. It was the previous night. I watched him loosen his tie while telling me about a meeting that had never happened. He did not hesitate. He did not over-explain. The lie came out as naturally as breath, so I lied too. I told him dinner would be ready in 20 minutes. That was the moment my investigation began. I started with his calendar. Grant and I shared an assistant for social events, and I could see which nights he claimed to be away. Then I checked credit card statements. The hotel in Charleston was not there. Neither were the restaurants, flights, or gifts that usually exposed an affair. Grant was too careful for that. But he had forgotten something small. Our cars used a family account for tolls. On nights when he claimed to be in Norfolk, his sedan crossed bridges toward Maryland. On other nights, it traveled west into Virginia. I printed every record and hid the pages beneath the lining of an old sewing basket. Then I searched his study. I hated myself while I did it. 17 years of marriage had trained me to treat his privacy like sacred ground. Grant kept the door closed, and I had rarely entered without knocking. That afternoon, I wore cotton gloves and moved carefully. I checked drawers, bookcases, the back of framed photographs, even the underside of his desk. I found nothing. Then I noticed dust along the baseboard behind a model destroyer. One narrow section was clean. The bookcase moved when I pulled it. Behind it was a small biometric safe. I sat on the carpet and stared at it until my knees went numb. The safe itself did not prove anything. Grant handled classified information. He had locked cases, secure phones, and rules I had learned not to question. But this safe was inside my house, concealed behind my furniture, and installed without my knowledge. I photographed it and moved the bookcase back. That night, I received a second envelope. Inside was a brass key and another message. Ask why your husband visits locker 214. The key had the name of a private railway station storage company stamped into it. The company operated lockers at Union Station in Washington. I should have gone to the police. Instead, I went alone. The next morning, I put on a gray coat, parked 2 blocks away, and entered Union Station with the key inside my glove. I felt as if everyone could see guilt on my face. Locker 214 stood at the end of a quiet corridor. The brass key turned smoothly. Inside was a black leather briefcase. For 1 second, I imagined explosives, government secrets, or something else I had no right to touch. Then I reminded myself that someone had sent me there deliberately. I opened the case. There were no love letters inside. There were bank statements. Page after page showed transfers among consulting companies, overseas accounts, and a foundation called Harbor Light. I recognized that name immediately. Harbor Light was our charity. I had helped create it to support families of sailors killed on active duty. Millions of dollars had passed through it. At the bottom of the case was a copy of my signature. Except I had never signed the document. It authorized the transfer of $3 million from my family trust into a company named Meridian Strategic Solutions. Grant's best friend, Rear Admiral Thomas Vail, owned Meridian through a chain of holding companies. My hands began to shake. The affair suddenly felt small. Someone had stolen my name, my inheritance, and money intended for grieving families, and my husband was connected to all of it. Then I heard footsteps in the corridor. Slow, heavy, coming closer. I shut the briefcase, slid it back into the locker, and turned the key. Before I could step away, a shadow crossed the floor. A man in a navy blue coat came around the corner. He looked directly at locker 214. Then he looked at me. Mrs. Mercer, he said. You need to come with me. Apart TWO. The womanayan, tirech code I did not move. The man was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with a scar beneath his left ear. His hands remained visible, but that did not comfort me. Who are you? I asked. Daniel Cross. Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Retired. Anyone can say that. He slowly removed a worn identification wallet and held it where I could see. The card had expired 4 years earlier. You sent the envelopes, I said. No, but I know who did. He glanced toward the station entrance. If Grant's people followed you, we have about 2 minutes. That frightened me more than any threat could have. I followed him into a crowded coffee shop. We sat near the front window, where people moved past us every few seconds. Daniel ordered 2 coffees neither of us drank. He told me the woman in the red coat was Commander Lee Bennett, a naval intelligence officer, assigned to Grant's command. She had spent 8 months collecting evidence against him and Thomas Vail. So she is his mistress, I said. Daniel's expression tightened. No. She is the reason you are still alive. He explained that Lee had approached him after discovering irregular military contracts. Companies with no employees were receiving millions for equipment that never arrived. The money moved through shell businesses, then into private accounts. Harbor Light was one of the laundering channels. My charity dinners gave the operation respectability. My signature gave it access to my trust. Why send me a picture that makes them look like lovers? I asked. Because Leah needed you to start looking without telling Grant. Anger makes people brave. Fear often makes them obedient. I wanted to hate Lee for manipulating me. But she had understood me better than I wanted to admit. If the first note had accused Grant of theft and corruption, I might have shown it to him. I might have let him explain it away. But betrayal opened my eyes. Daniel leaned closer. Lee disappeared 6 days ago. The noise of the coffee shop faded around me. Disappeared how? Her apartment was cleaned. Her phone went dead. Her command says she requested emergency leave. But there is no signed request. You think Grant hurt her? I think Grant knows she found something. And I think that safe in his study may contain it. I stared at him. How do you know about the safe? Because Lee installed the original one in a secure office. Your husband had it moved after she got too close. Daniel gave me a small device that looked like a black button. It could capture a fingerprint from a smooth surface and create a temporary biometric copy. I'm not asking you to play detective, he said. I'm asking you to survive long enough to choose what happens next. But I had already made my choice. That evening, Grant came home earlier than expected. I was in the kitchen preparing salmon. He approached from behind and wrapped his arms around my waist. For one terrible second, muscle memory told me to relax against him. Then I remembered the forged signature. I missed you, he whispered. You were gone one night. A long night. He kissed my neck. I kept the knife steady in my hand. During dinner, he asked what I had done that day. Nothing interesting, I said. A fitting lunch. Some errands. His eyes stayed on me half a second too long. Where did you have lunch? Georgetown. With whom? I smiled. Are you interrogating me? Admiral, he smiled back, but his eyes did not. Just making conversation. After dinner, I poured him bourbon. I chose the heavy crystal glass he always used and watched him wrap his right hand around it. When he went upstairs, I carried the glass into the pantry. I pressed Daniel's device against the clearest fingerprint and waited for its light to turn green. At 2 a.m, Grant was asleep. I entered his study barefoot. Every old floorboard sounded like a gunshot. I pulled the bookcase forward and pressed the artificial print to the safe. A green light appeared. The lock clicked. Inside were 3 encrypted drives, a stack of passports, and a red leather folder marked with the crest of Harbor Light. There was also a pistol. I opened the folder first. It contained insurance policies on my life. Grant was the beneficiary of 2 policies. Meridian Strategic Solutions was the beneficiary of a third. Together, they were worth $12 million. One policy had been purchased only 4 months earlier. My forged signature appeared on every page. Underneath them was a medical report stating that I had a dangerous heart condition. I did not have a heart condition. I photographed every document. Then I connected a small drive Daniel had given me and copied what I could from the safe. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. I froze. The study door opened. Grant stood there wearing a robe. Evie. The safe was hidden behind the open bookcase, but the red folder was still in my hands. I lowered it behind the desk. What are you doing? He asked. My mind went blank. Then I saw the model destroyer on the floor. I heard something fall, I said. I thought one of your windows was open. A Grant walked toward me. At 2 a.m, the storm woke me. There was no storm. He stopped close enough for me to smell bourbon on his breath. His gaze moved from my face to the desk, then to my bare feet. You look frightened, he said. You startled me. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then he touched my cheek. You know I would never let anything happen to you." I forced myself to smile. "I know." He led me upstairs with his hand against the back of my neck. I lay beside him until dawn, listening to his breathing and wondering whether the man I had loved was planning my death. At 7, Grant left for the Pentagon. At 7:15, I called Daniel. At 7:20, I discovered the black drive was gone from my pocket. Grant had taken it while I slept. Part Tariu, My Odu and Feneral. I had copied the safe onto 2 drives. Grant knew about only one. The second was taped beneath the study desk, exactly where Daniel had told me to hide it, if I was interrupted. I retrieved it with shaking hands and drove to a parking garage in Arlington. Daniel was waiting in an old pickup truck. He examined the files on a laptop that was not connected to the internet. Most were encrypted, but one folder opened. It was labeled Quiet Harbor. Inside were photographs of military equipment, invoices, shipping schedules, and payments to officials. There were also private files on people Grant wanted to control: affairs, gambling debts, secret bank accounts, and medical records. My husband had not simply built a theft operation. He had built a blackmail network. Then Daniel opened a calendar. My initials appeared beside a date 11 days away. Twin 240, River Road. Beside the entry were 2 words: cardiac event. My death had an appointment. Daniel closed the laptop. "You cannot go home. If I disappear now, he'll know I have the files. If you stay, he may kill you. Then we make sure he believes I still know nothing." Daniel looked at me for a long time. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I host the Harbor Light Gala next Saturday. Grant, Vail, defense contractors, reporters, and half the Navy's senior leadership will be in my ballroom." That is 3 days before the date in his calendar. Good. We expose him where he cannot bury it. The Daniel said evidence had to go through official channels. But Grant had allies inside those channels. Leah had learned that the hard way. If we handed the files to the wrong person, everything could disappear. So we needed 3 things: proof that could not be explained away, multiple independent witnesses, and a way to make Grant confess. That afternoon, I returned home and acted like a wife planning a party. I discussed flowers with the decorator. I approved minutes. I called donors and laughed at jokes I did not hear. When Grant came home, I kissed him first. He searched my face for suspicion. I gave him affection. "I'm sorry I was strange last night," I said. "I haven't been sleeping." "You should see Dr. Halpern." That name caught me. Dr. Miles Halpern had signed the false medical report in the safe. "Maybe I will," I said. Grant seemed pleased. The next morning, I made an appointment. Halpern's office occupied the top floor of a private clinic in Bethesda. He was a thin man with careful silver hair and nervous hands. He asked about chest pressure before I mentioned any symptoms. "Your husband expressed concern," he said. "Grant called you. He mentioned you had experienced dizziness." "I haven't." Halpern looked at his notes. Perhaps I misunderstood. I placed a copy of the forged report on his desk. The color left his face. "Where did you get that?" "You diagnosed a condition I do not have." "Mrs. Mercer, I can explain." "Then explain it to the federal agents waiting downstairs." There were no agents downstairs, but Halpern believed me. He stood so quickly his chair struck the wall. He locked the door, lowered his voice, and told me Grant had threatened him. Years earlier, Halpern had become addicted to pain medication after back surgery. Grant obtained evidence that could end his career. In return, Halpern signed medical forms and issued prescriptions under false names. "What prescriptions?" I asked. He began to cry. One was a drug that could trigger a fatal heart rhythm when combined with alcohol. In a person supposedly suffering from an existing condition, The death might appear natural. Was it for me? Halpern nodded. I wanted to break something. Instead, I placed my phone on the desk. You are going to say that again while I record it. He did. Then he told me something worse. I was not the first. 2 years earlier, a Navy accountant named Peter Lawson died after threatening to expose false contracts. His death was ruled a heart attack. Halpern had provided the same drug. Grant had killed a man without touching him. When I left the clinic, Daniel called with news. He had found Lee Bennett. She was alive. We met that night at an abandoned farmhouse outside Leesburg. Lee sat at a wooden table beneath a single lamp. She looked exhausted, with a bruise along her jaw. But her eyes were sharp. She told me Grant's security chief had grabbed her outside her apartment. She escaped after causing the car to crash, then hid because she did not know whom to trust. Why involve me? I asked. Because the money came from your trust. The house belongs to you. And every powerful man in Grant's circle believes you are decoration. So you used me. Less. She did not look away. And I am sorry. But I also knew you were the only person he underestimated. I showed her Halpern's confession and the calendar entry. Lee listened in silence. Then she gave me the final piece. She had recorded Grant and Vale discussing the operation in Charleston. The photograph outside the hotel was taken seconds after Grant discovered her recording device. She pretended she wanted to join their network. She flirted with him and made him believe she could be controlled. Grant had kissed her for the cameras outside. She let him. That was the photograph sent to me. You said she was not the secret, I whispered. Because I wasn't, Lee said. You were. What does that mean? Hey, she opened a file and showed me a copy of my grandmother's trust. The mansion, investments, and shipping shares I had inherited were worth far more than Grant had told me. My late grandfather's company held patents used in modern naval navigation systems. Grant had secretly used my voting rights to influence defense contracts. I was not merely the respectable wife beside him. I was the financial engine beneath his entire criminal empire. And if I died, control passed to my husband. Grant had married me for access. Maybe not at first. Maybe some part of our love had once been real. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being his wife and become his final acquisition. I cried then. Not loudly. I simply sat at that rough table while 17 years of memories changed shape inside me. Leah reached for my hand. We can cancel the gala, she said. I wiped my face. No, I answered. We are going to give my husband the celebration he deserves. Part of U.R.T. Gala, on the night of the Harbor Light Gala. 400 guests filled my home. Crystal chandeliers glowed above white uniforms, black tuxedos, and silk dresses. A string quartet played near the staircase. Cameras flashed as Grant and I welcomed senators, admirals, executives, and families who had lost loved ones at sea. I wore a white suit. Grant loved it. You look like the Admiral tonight, he whispered. Maybe I finally learned from you. He laughed and kissed my cheek for the photographers. Our plan had many moving pieces. Daniel had delivered complete copies of the evidence to 3 separate federal offices, 2 investigative reporters, and an attorney representing military families. Each package was scheduled to open at 10 o'clock. Lee entered the gala disguised as part of the catering staff. Docker. Halpern waited in a hotel with federal protection, arranged through an Inspector General Daniel trusted. And I carried a wireless microphone beneath my jacket. At 9:30, I watched Thomas Vale enter Grant's study. Grant followed him 5 minutes later. I waited another minute, then joined them. Vale was pouring bourbon. He was shorter than Grant and heavier, with a round face that always looked friendly in photographs. Private meeting, I asked. Grant closed the door behind me. Tom and I were discussing a donor. Meridian Strategic Solutions. The room became still. Vale put down the bottle. Grant's expression did not change. That was what made him dangerous. Even surprised, he became calmer. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked. "Locker 214. Vale looked at Grant. That single glance told me everything. Grant stepped closer. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand why you insured my life for $12 million. He locked the study door. Music and conversation continued beyond the walls. Hundreds of people were only a few rooms away, but suddenly the study felt isolated from the world. "Evelyn," Vale said softly, "this can be resolved. Was that what you told Peter Lawson?" Vale's face twitched. Grant did not deny it. Instead, he sighed as if I had disappointed him. "You were never supposed to see any of this," he said. "Because I'm too stupid. Because you were happy. I almost laughed. You stole from my family. You used a charity for dead sailors. You planned to murder me. I protected you from realities you could not understand." There he was. The real Grant. Not the hero, not the husband, but the man who believed power made every crime reasonable. "Help me understand," I said. "Tell me why I had to die." Vale moved toward the door. Grant stopped him with a look. Then Grant began to explain. "The contracts were bigger than money," he said. "Money bought influence. Influence controlled policy. Policy protected the country. He claimed elected officials were weak, businesses were greedy, and only men like him could keep America safe." "And me?" I asked. For the first time, something like regret crossed his face. "You started asking questions. So you created a heart condition. Halpern was careless. You scheduled my death for Tuesday night." Vale whispered a curse. Grant stared at me. "Who else knows?" "No one." It was the most important lie I had ever told. He relaxed slightly. "Then we can fix this," he said. "You will sign control of the trust to me. You will receive treatment somewhere private. In time, everyone will believe the pressure became too much for you. And if I refuse?" Grant looked toward the pistol safe. "You won't." I reached into my jacket. Both men tensed. I pulled out my wedding ring. 17 years, I said. "Was any of it real?" Grant's face softened, and for one foolish heartbeat, I wanted him to say yes. "At the beginning," he said. "But love is a luxury, Evie. Power lasts longer." That answer killed the last living part of our marriage. I placed the ring on his desk. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For confessing." At exactly 10 o'clock, every television in the mansion turned on. The screens had been installed for a Harbor Light tribute video. Instead, they displayed Grant's financial records, false contracts, forged documents, and the calendar entry for my death. Then the live audio from his study began playing through the ballroom speakers. His voice carried through the house. "Love is a luxury. Power lasts longer." Outside the study, music stopped. Guests fell silent. Reporters raised their phones. Families stared at the evidence, showing how their charity donations had been stolen. Grant lunged toward me. I stepped aside and unlocked the door remotely from my phone. Daniel entered with 2 federal agents. Vale raised both hands immediately. Grant did not. He struck Daniel, shoved one agent into the bookcase, and reached for the safe. I knew he wanted the pistol. But Leah had removed it earlier. Grant opened the empty compartment and turned toward me with a look I will never forget. It was not anger. It was disbelief. He could not understand how the quiet wife in the white suit had defeated him inside his own command center. The agents forced him to the floor. As they pulled him into the hallway, hundreds of guests watched. Cameras captured his medals crooked across his chest and blood on his lip. He shouted that he had protected them. He called the evidence fabricated. He ordered junior officers to help him. No one moved. At the foot of the staircase, a woman named Sarah Lawson stepped forward. Peter Lawson had been her husband. She looked Grant in the eye. "You murdered him," she said. Grant stopped struggling. For the first time that night, he looked. Part 5E, Bu Hapulku Ubu Y. The story became national news before sunrise. Grant Mercer, the decorated admiral, once expected to become chief of naval operations, was arrested on charges involving fraud, conspiracy, extortion, obstruction, and murder. Thomas Vale made a deal within 48 hours. He provided account passwords, names, and recordings in exchange for a reduced sentence. Men who had praised Grant on television claimed they barely knew him. Contractors returned money. Officials resigned. Investigations spread across 3 states and 2 federal departments. Dr. Halpern surrendered his license and testified about the drug used to kill Peter Lawson. The medical examiner reopened the case. Trace evidence preserved from Peter's autopsy supported Halpern's confession. Leah received a commendation in private, though the Navy never publicly described everything she had done. She told me that was fine. She had not risked her life for a medal. Daniel returned to retirement after the trials. He bought a small fishing boat and named it Quiet Harbor, which I thought was either very funny or deeply unhealthy. Grant's trial lasted 11 weeks. I testified for 2 days. He sat across the courtroom in a dark suit, without medals, aids, or cameras positioned to catch his best angle. Sometimes he watched the jury. Most of the time, he watched me. His lawyers tried to portray me as a bitter wife seeking revenge after discovering an affair. That strategy ended when Leah testified that no affair had occurred and played the Charleston recording. Then the prosecutors played Grant's confession from the gala. Love is a luxury. Power lasts longer. The jury heard his voice describe my planned death. They deliberated for 6 hours. Grant was convicted on every major charge, including conspiracy in Peter Lawson's murder and conspiracy to murder me. He received life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. When the judge asked if he wished to speak, Grant stood. He did not apologize to Peter's widow. He did not apologize to the families whose money he stole. He did not apologize to me. He said history would understand him. That was Grant until the end. He believed the future owed him admiration, even after the present had seen the truth. As marshals led him away, he turned toward me. "You would have had everything," he said. I answered quietly, but he heard me. "I do now." The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Because the mansion and most of the original trust remained legally mine, Grant could not take them. His personal assets were seized and distributed among victims. I sold the house anyway. People were surprised. They thought I would enjoy living in the place where I had defeated him. But victory does not make a haunted house feel like home. Every room held a version of me who had smiled, served dinner, and mistaken silence for peace. I did not want to live with her ghost. I used part of the sale to repay every dollar stolen from Harbor Light. Then I dissolved the old organization and created a new foundation with independent oversight. Sarah Lawson became one of its directors. We named it the Beacon Fund. It paid legal bills, tuition, housing costs, and emergency expenses for military families. Every transaction was published. No admirals gave speeches. No politicians sat on the board. The first scholarship went to Peter Lawson's daughter. On the day we presented it, Sarah hugged me and cried. I cried too. The reporters photographed us, but this time I did not feel like decoration in someone else's story. I felt present. I moved into a smaller house near Annapolis, close enough to smell the bay in the morning. It had uneven floors, blue shutters, and a kitchen that needed work. I loved it immediately. For the first few months, I woke at every sound. I checked locks twice. I avoided white marble. When a man raised his voice in a restaurant, my hands began to tremble. Justice had ended the danger, but it did not erase what the danger had done to me. I started seeing a therapist. I learned that strength was not the absence of fear. Strength was doing the next honest thing, while fear walked beside me. Some days, the next honest thing was speaking at a hearing. Other days, it was getting out of bed. One rainy afternoon, almost a year after the gala, a package arrived with no return address. For a moment, the sight of it took me back to the first cream envelope and the photograph of Grant with Leah. Inside was my wedding ring. The Federal Evidence Unit had released it. I held it beneath the kitchen light. It was a simple gold band, scratched after 17 years. I remembered the young naval captain who had placed it on my finger. I remembered dancing with him in a rented hall, while my grandmother laughed. I remembered believing that our life would be honorable because he wore a uniform. I had spent months asking whether he ever loved me. At last, I understood that the answer no longer mattered. My love had been real. My loyalty had been real. My mistakes had been real too. His lies could not travel backward through time and make my heart dishonest. They belonged to him, not me. I drove to the Chesapeake Bay at sunset. Wind moved across the water, turning it gray and silver. A few sailboats leaned in the distance. Leah stood beside me. We had become friends, though neither of us spoke much about Grant anymore. "Are you sure?" she asked. I looked at the ring one final time. Then I threw it. The gold flashed once before disappearing into the dark water. I expected a dramatic feeling. Triumph, grief, perhaps freedom arriving like thunder. Instead, I felt quiet, and the quiet was enough. Months later, I received a letter from Grant. Prison officials had inspected it before forwarding it. He wrote 12 pages about betrayal. Mine, not his. He said I had destroyed a career, a legacy, and a marriage because I could not understand sacrifice. At the end, he asked me to visit. I did not answer. I placed the letter in the fireplace and watched his words turn black, curl at the edges, and become ash. That winter, the Beacon Fund opened its first family center. Sarah cut the ribbon. Leah stood near the back. Daniel came wearing a tie covered in tiny fishing boats. Before the doors opened, I walked through the empty building alone. There were classrooms, legal offices, a childcare room, and a kitchen where families could share meals. On one wall hung photographs of service members whose families the fund had helped. Peter Lawson's photograph was first. I stopped in front of it. "We got him," I whispered. But revenge was no longer the word I would use. Revenge was what I wanted when I first saw my forged signature. It was hot, sharp, and personal. Justice was different. Justice returned stolen money. Justice cleared Peter's name. Justice gave his daughter a future. Justice turned a house built on lies into a place where other people could find help. Grant believed power meant making people afraid to leave you. I learned that real power was leaving anyway. On opening day, hundreds of people entered the center. No one asked me to stand beside a famous man. No one introduced me as an anchor, a wife, or the woman behind someone else's success. They called me Evelyn. For the first time in 17 years, my own name sounded like home. Grant had once told me that love was a luxury and power lasted longer. He was wrong. His power ended the moment I stopped being afraid of him. And when I walked out carrying only one suitcase, I did not leave my life behind. I finally took it with me,